went on a trip with some prospectors to a place that wasn't mapped at all. One of the characteristics of this place was that it was covered in cloud all the time, and it was impenetrable to electromagnetic radiation. So even satellite photographs of this island in the middle of the Pacific didn't register anything. But some people washed up on its shore at some time and came back with reports, and we mounted an expedition to this island. It was financed by an oil company, like most things these days, but they took along a number of other people to look at various things on the island. We arrived on the island and were waited for a while and were greeted by the local population, who eventually took us inland. This is on the side of the island that we landed on. The landscape was very, very arid, but slowly we progressed up the valley, and this is the kind of landscape that we encountered. Now, at the point where we landed, the material culture was fairly impoverished, but fairly soon we were taken to a settlement which looked something like this. On this part of the island, there was quite an advanced material culture. The main principle that was being observed by everyone there was the principle of utility. Everything had a purpose, and it was a very strict and very simple purpose of either making money or operating in something in some method along those lines. This is the most recent settlement in the island, and from conversations with the local inhabitants, one quickly got the impression that they were very, very interested in the built environment around them. This was one of the main preoccupations that oriented the society in this part of the island that we visited. And they all had very strict ideas about it. Now, this is another form of settlement that they had. They were very interested in mobility and that kind of thing. And this is one of their most recent intrusions into that area. Their technology is fairly advanced. Here's a scheme for one of their more sophisticated educational establishments, expressing a lot of the principles that they attach themselves to. Now, there were a number of people in this society who were slightly unhappy with it, but they sort of spoke to us towards the middle of our stay in this area. We were only going to make a peripheral penetration into this island, but I was befriended by an inhabitant of this place who told me that the name of this city was Pragmatia. Now, he took me into a local dive, and he spent a lot of time telling me about a lot of things that existed on the island that he'd never visited, but there were rumors about other things going on the island. And we were eventually taken to a fairly old man who lived on the edges of Pragmatia, but he'd been to the town of Eclectia, and he spoke to us, and he said that if one really wanted to go back into the outside world, which they had quite a lot of knowledge of, it would be very important to visit all the settlements on the island and speak to various people, including a very, very wise person who was actually in the center of the island. So I had to get permission from the rest of the expedition, and eventually we arranged it was arranged that I could go on this trip with a couple of people from Pragmatia who had all their documents in order to go from one of these places to another, because there was restricted traffic in movement from one city to another on this island, because in the past, I learned later, there had been tremendous battles between the various ideologies, and that they had to establish a modus vivendi. So I went along the road from Pragmatia and eventually arrived at the customs post, the Pragmatia customs post, where we were all checked out, all our ideological baggage was removed, we were totally debugged, and then we were allowed to progress into the area of no man's land. Now, this is the view of the place where the crossroads between the routes to the various cities occurs, and this is how one approaches it. It's a rather an imposing structure, and there's a very narrow road leading up to it. As one gets closer to it, one sees that there is a cascade of water which prevents one from seeing beyond, and one goes through this water to a place in the middle. Now, this is the second process of cleansing one from the previous place that one had left. That this is a device that was worked out over many, many years, because after the great periods of conflicts, there were further conflicts. And this place, the responsibility of the person who lives here is to control the traffic between the conflicting territories on this island. Now, I was fairly frightened by all this, but I was encouraged to move along, and I ended up in this very strange space in the middle of this structure, having gone through this waterfall and been wet by these very clean waters. This space in the middle was very, very smelly. It had bats flying around. It had endless numbers of pigeons buzzing in and out, and there was a lot of guano all over the place. At the center of this circle, there was a disc raised up a little bit, just a small amount, and in the middle of the disc there was a hole. And we, just out of curiosity, we dropped some pebbles into this hole, and we never heard any sound. But this hole goes on forever. There's no bottom to it. And above this hole there was a pendulum hanging. And this pendulum, we tried to swing it, but it wouldn't swing. It was just a very large ball hanging on a thread. And however hard we tried to move the pendulum, it just didn't move. So we were in this space, and eventually, out of curiosity, we decided to go into one of the entries around the space. You can see the pendulum hanging above the hole, and there are those sort of slightly obscure entries which have staircases in them. We went up one of these staircases and emerged in a sort of an amphitheater inside this very large building. And this is where we emerged, in this amphitheater, and were immediately greeted by a very, very wise old man who took us to his workspace. Now he was a very wise person. He knew a lot about what was happening in the rest of the world. He was very much in touch with everything that was going on, and he gave us a very clear history of this of what had been happening on this island for many, many centuries. He explained that it was a place that had once been in contact with the rest of the world, but had been disconnected, partly through their own volition. They didn't want to be involved in commerce or anything with other civilizations, because they had peculiar things to develop among themselves. But they did manage to have contacts. Occasionally they sent out spies, and they knew what was going on in the rest of the world. And from the date of the invention of radio and things like that, they were capable of keeping in very close touch with the rest of the world. Now, he explained that there were four basic cities on this island. The city that we'd landed at is the city of Pragmatia, And they're the most open city because they really are into ripping off other technologies and things like that. They're really advancing and aggressive. There were other cities he talked to us about. There is Purisma, which is in a state of decline, and there is the city of Utopia, which I will come to later, and then the city of Eclectia, which was our last visit. Now, on this map, which I had to draw from one of his own maps, because the superintendent of this building actually has to control. He's almost like a peacekeeping force on the island. He has to keep a very close observation of the control of territories and things like that. It's very interesting that the various cities are desperate to control the area immediately around them and some of the road towards the center, but they leave all the hinterland as a sort of a territory which is the preserve of the superintendent. So even though he controls a very small place on the actual map, where the crossing of the roads occurs, he actually has control over a very large area of the hinterland, and he does have a small number of citizens and vassals who provide him with all the necessary food and essentials for survival. So he doesn't live at all badly. Whereas these cities are really desperate to control this territory immediately around them and along the roads which they built. You can see that the roads are to some extent characteristic of the various civilizations that support them. Now, the demarcation of territories is rather fortunate because it provides for a no man's land between these various groups of people who occasionally do get involved in bloody conflict and destroy each other's constructions and settlements. Now, between these four civilizations, between these four territories, there are geographical features that also isolate them from one another. There's on the northern part of the island, there's a mountain, very, very tall mountain that's almost impossible to get across. So the communications between Utopia and Eclectia are almost non-existent. I mean, there are very, very few people who have been known to get across from one to the other without going through the control point. Similarly, it's very, very difficult to get from Purisma to Pragmatia because there's a very, very deep valley between those two. But there is quite a lot of trade, overland trade, which is actually strictly illegal, but it is allowed to happen between Utopia and Purisma, and also between Eclectia and Pragmatia. In recent years, there's been a great deal of trade between Eclectia and Pragmatia, but there is an attempt to put a stop to that. Now, the basic this place that the superintendent lives in is structured around a large number of principles and observances, not only of things that exist within the landscape that he lives on, but also observance of general principles that order existence both in this world and in the next. I mean, the building that he lives in is a mirror of the whole universe. So the orientation of this building to the landscape is explained here with the four elements and the various bits of landscape in relation to the roads. There is also a vertical organization of the building which relates to these important principles, which is explained in this diagram with nature at the lowest level, which is connected with the ideas of compromise, man in the middle, and eternity at the top, of the structure with a progression towards perfection. I mean, a lot of these things would seem arguable to a visitor, but I can assure you that after a long discussion with the superintendent, it was perfectly clear to me that all these things have got great meaning, and they are absolutely right, because that this structure took many, many years to conceive and was the product of a great deal of thought and rebuilding. The structure originally started off as a wooden structure, but it went through a number of masonry phases and eventually ended up in its present form about 1,500 years ago. And it's actually pretty stable. There are a few bits that change, mainly in the lower areas. The areas of compromise are continually changing, but the main superstructure of this thing is almost fixed, apart from things like the ephemeral appendages, such as flags and vegetation. Those things can change, and the living elements can change, but as a rule, the further up you go, the more unchanging you get. Now, this is just how the diagram relates to the general impression of the building. I'm sorry that I couldn't bring you any photographs of the actual structure, but unfortunately, the structure has got very, very powerful. I mean, we developed a special film. Kodak and a number of other companies got together and developed a film that used other than electromagnetic radiation for the recording of images. But even that special film could not record this object. So what you have before you is an impression rather than an exact record of what we saw. But I'm told by the colleagues that I went with that it's a pretty accurate explanation of the building. Now, we then embarked on a very long discussion with the superintendent of the Crossroads, and he explained to us that this place that was actually marked by this building was the umbilicus mundi, the center of the earth, and he went through long historical arguments about it, and he actually had 18th century maps from Europe which which suggested the location of paradise. And here you see two maps from these 18th century documents that argue about where paradise was and all that kind of thing. I mean, there's paradise in the Persian Gulf, there's paradise on between the Tigris and the Euphrates. There were lots and lots of proposed locations, but he actually convinced us that the original terrestrial paradise was at this very point in the world, which had seldom been visited by foreign travelers. Having been introduced to the general idea of this place, we were allowed to disrobe and wash ourselves, and we were entertained in the main space of this building, which surrounded this amphitheater. The superintendent took us through the various rooms of the building. You can see that the stairs that come out of the amphitheater are all coloured differently. That they are all coloured to represent the 7 heavenly spheres, and you go to an area of peace on the periphery of this, having gone through the various rings that surround the sun. And each one of the major spaces in the building at this public level were coloured according to the orientation. This is the true principle of colouring for orientation. You have black at the north, and red at the south, blue to the east, and yellow to the west. And all the actual rituals of doing things within these spaces relate not only to the times of the day, but also to the activities that go in them. And the life of the superintendent is highly regimented, although when we were there, he made certain allowances since we were people from the outside. Normally, anyone visiting him has to go through a long period of initiation. Now, he took a liking to us, so he took us to some parts of his structure that were seldom visited by other people other than the superintendent himself. And I must explain that the post, the role of superintendent is something that rotates between the four cities, and they have to be initiated through a long period of separation and debugging. But we climbed up to the next level up in the building, which were his private apartments. He had a number of private apartments. And we didn't spend a lot of time there. And we were then taken up into the upper levels of this structure, which are shown in this image over here. The level above the habitable apartments of this building have a lake on them. You will see in this previous drawing that from the inside of the building one cannot perceive that there is anything further outside that continues the structure, and there's a reflecting pool that allows light to bounce off, so that there's a very soft light in the main hall of the building. But as one goes up, one finds a garden, a water garden, which has on it. It's a water garden with flamingos and swans swimming on the water garden, and it's an area of a reasonable amount of peace. There's quite a lot of wind rustling through there, and there are reeds and bulrushes at this level. The various levels in this building, we were told, have got appropriate bird life attached to them. The lowest level I explained earlier had pigeons and starlings as well as bats. The level at which the superintendent lives at had a number of parrots, which have got the important messages. Because it's the place of man, there is an animal that mimics man and actually records things that he says and reminds him of them. The next level up is a level of semi-perfection, which has not peacocks. It has flamingos and swans, and some of these are eaten on ceremonial occasions by the inhabitants of the building. But you will see that at this level there are cascading waters that come down into the pond, and there is characteristic vegetation of those that would be appropriate to those sort of birds. Now, between this level and the level above, which we visited later, there are these rather large elements that come down, which are big lamps that shine on the water at night and reflect into the main space. There are no visible lamps inside the building. And the flags are changed every few weeks in the same way that you get in our civilization. The vestments of various religious organizations do change according to the times of the year. So these are used as a sign of the various times of the year. And between the lamps there are wires stretched with bells and aeolian harps that make wind music. This is another thing that has various levels in the structure. There is the music of man, which is made inside the space, and then there is this music that comes from the wind at this level, and at the level above there is total silence. Now we were taken to the area above after spending a day at the level of the water garden, and we were taken up onto the Paradise Garden. This garden was built to mimic the original garden that had existed on this island. And as I explained earlier, I showed you the maps that were to do with the dispute about where it had originally been. And after many investigations, the original designers of this place came to the conclusion that this is exactly how it had been, a very, very formal garden with 4 tall trees in the middle, and a number of orange trees all the way around. Now, because this place is actually outside time, there are, at any one stage, there are all the stages of the year represented in the trees. The orange trees are in a state of winter without any leaves on them. Then they are in spring, and then in summer, and then the fruit comes out in autumn. So there are always 4 trees bearing fruit, and these rotate around this space. You will also see that in the middle of the garden there's a fountain which is continually bringing up water, and the water then goes along 4 channels and cascades down into the pool below, in which the flamingos and the swans are swimming. Because this is a slightly sacred place on this building, it is lit at night by naked flames, and there are 64 torches on top of the various on top of the 4 corner pavilions. Now this is just a representation out of which he explained that the origins of this were quite well understood in Middle Eastern cultures who actually tried to record the forms of this garden in their various artifacts. This is a representation of a carpet that he managed to get hold of as in one of the few actual movements of a material object onto the island. The one thing that did come in quite freely onto the island were publications, which they got hold of somehow. But generally speaking, material objects didn't come there. You can see the torches around the corner pavilions. Now, on top of these corner pavilions, there were conical roofs that had out of them chimneys, and he explained to us that that the architecture of this place included a lot of things that are normally don't partake in one's concept of a structure, and one of the most important aspects of this building was smoke that came out of these various corner pavilions, because they expressed that the smoke, the color of the smoke, and the way it moved expressed the mood in the building, and was a sign taken by the people in the surrounding territories. At this level, the birds that were kept were peacocks, and there were a number of tame eagles, but there are always a number of attendants flying fairly large kites to frighten away some of the rather rapacious hawks that exist on the island, because as you can see there is a very steep mountain behind the structure, and it's that's one of the few intrusions that occurs on this level. And this is a view of the whole structure from above. Now, we were then taken down to the lower levels again through the whole building, and you can see this is a very rapid anatomical drawing of the whole structure, taking us down to the levels that occur below the main reception areas that we visited. We were taken down the various staircases. We went through the amphitheater again and then down the staircase towards the right, and we entered into a very, very dark space down at the base of the mountain. Just before we got there, we had a glimpse of this fairly bleak mountain that all these things were carved into, and this is the drawing of the inside of this mountain, which had a very complicated labyrinth, which is the place where all the superintendents are initiated at the middle of this labyrinth, and then they go through 7 phases of enlightenment, and they end up on the outer ring, at which time they can actually experience and use the various service spaces around this. Now, the mountain is to do with memory and things that are related to the body and the mind, but sort of rather introspective. There is at the end at the beginning and the end of the labyrinth, there is a mausoleum in which there is a catacomb which goes off into the mountain, and that's really one of the few unfinished parts of the structure at this point. There are miners who from time to time go in there and expand this to make more room for further dead superintendents. There are a number of other spaces, including a place on the top left-hand corner, which is a place for sensual pursuits, with lots of soft surfaces and damp surfaces at fairly close to body temperatures. There is a large religious structure on the bottom left-hand side, which isn't much used at present, although there are occasional revivals. There is an alchemical laboratory and an astrological observatory in the bottom right-hand corner, and there's a cavern for esoteric pursuits on the top right-hand corner. We weren't let into the secrets of these 2 spaces on the right-hand side, because they were to do with very high levels of initiation. We didn't spend a lot of time in this part of the building. We were taken through the building again, and this is one a view in a place for esoteric pursuits. It's a sort of slightly cavernous space which has been built into the mountain. We were then taken back into the main hall of the palace, and we were led down into the valley, which is the place where the superintendent contemplates the future and looks and thinks about things that are happening on the island, and occasionally receives messages. There are a number of pavilions that step down into the valley, and between the pavilions there is a stream that runs down in the valley, and there is a very secluded and quiet place, just a flat piece of ground to the side of the valley where some of the most intimate communications take place outside the building. Here's a detail of that space. Now, this was at the end of our second day in the building. We were then taken to the other side, the side of the lake, which represents the female principals. on this enormous palace, and there are a number of bathing pools at various temperatures, which lead into a very, very clean lake. And the superintendent took us on his barge for a trip along one of the shores of the lake. And this is a view as one leaves the structure on this ceremonial barge, which is also part of the building. It's part of the total concept of the place. And we went along the barge. We met a few of his vassals who live along these shores. These people provide him with rice and other agricultural goods. And then we had to keep within a certain distance of the settlements. This is one of the towns in the civilization of Eclectia, which we will visit later. We had to maintain a distance because there were patrols. And one of the problems that the superintendent has is that once he's left whatever place he comes from, he's not allowed to visit any of those places for the rest of his life, so that he can control the commerce. And this is another view of another town. We didn't get close to the other bank, which is on the Pragmatia side of the lake. Now, from the barge, we could see a number of we could see the exterior of the building, and he explained to us that the shapes, the forms of the various apartments, which you can see here, are colored in the true colors of their orientation, as I explained earlier. These places, each one of them is in the form of a dog's head, because his palace is the Canos quadrifrons, the guard dog of the various routes and landscapes. And you can see that from this view, which is in his own landscape, the territory he controls, the heads appear to be smiling and fairly friendly. But when one actually looks at them from the approach roads, from the other angle that one normally comes to them from the various towns, they are more menacing. So all the things have got some special meaning. Now, from the lake, that was another day's involvement. We were taken to the hunting park, which is which represents all the male principals in the building. Underneath the main banqueting hall in the building, there are all the stables in which all the horses are kept, and you can see that the horses drinking at the drinking trough, which is in a line with the main hunting avenue, which goes outside those gates. And scattered around in this park, there are a number of ruins which are left over from previous occupations of the site. The site, like most sites that are invested with a great religious meaning, have had a number of layers of interpretation of that, and these are some very early temples that remain and are in ruins. Here's another one which is more intact. We were taken, and the superintendent assured us that there were a large number of other ones, but they weren't going to disturb the remains of any of these previous things that weren't visible, because the various cities had controlled this point at one stage or another, and if any of them had heard of the disturbance of their remains, they would be rather upset that some had been disturbed in the interests of others. So, after having been at these, in the various landscapes controlled by the superintendent, he suggested that we go on our own separate trips to the other three cities that we hadn't visited, because he couldn't accompany us. And he arranged for a guide to be provided. So we went towards the city of Purisma. Now, this is the customs post of the city of Purisma. You remember the customs post of Pragmatia. It was just a caravan with gas cylinders outside it and all that kind of thing. And the gate for the city of Pragmatia was a boom gate like the ones you get at military camp entrances. But here there was a strict observance of lots of principles that guide the constructions in the civilization of Purisma. One of them being that the structure that opens a route mustn't actually move outside its plane and things like that. So the gate is a sliding gate that moves back on tracks. That there were a lot of quirks in this civilization. So we went along and I mean I said before that the ideology here is in the state of decline, and we visited a number of its main monuments. They were scattered about, some of them in very, very bad shape. Those were from a strong period. These were other structures that were less talked about. And then there was a period of decline in this civilization, which sort of ended up like this. I wasn't very impressed by the productions of this group of people. They were fairly depressed. They were obsessed by the image of morality and things like that, although their own involvement with it was fairly peripheral. Now, the next place we visited was a curious settlement, a curious group of people. They lived in a place called Utopia. You can see that their customs post is a provisional customs post. It's something that's carved out in the rock, which is on the side of the mountain. And the route that goes from there to their settlement is sort of wide, is narrow and tight, because they haven't got round to building the road. They live in places like this because they're obsessed by perfection, and until they can actually agree on perfection, they aren't prepared to make any compromises. So they live in these caverns, and they produce ideas about how it could be or how it should be. This is their university. You can see this is the Senate of their university. It's a place around a tree. This was the level of agreement that they could achieve, and it actually works very well within their climate. This is the kind of production that they produce. But whenever they embark on any one of these things, somebody else develops one that is approved, and the whole thing has to start again from scratch. So there is no evidence of their material advancement in the area of producing objects, but they are very, very advanced in discussing the possibilities of objects and their meanings. This is a very late version. As you can see, there is a certain amount of influence from Purisma, because at a certain time, a few years back, there was quite a lot of commerce between them across the plain, which was then brought to an end by a great expansion in the numbers of carnivorous animals in the plain, which weren't being controlled by the superintendent. So the local fauna actually helps to control that, as the storms that sometimes occur on the lake control the commerce between Eclectia and Pragmatia. Now, the last city that we visited was the city of Eclectia, and here was the gatehouse of the city of Eclectia. Every element to these, this was designed by one of their foremost designers, every element had to be different and unexpected, so that even the gate itself had to be made out of two different sized elements, even though it wasn't absolutely necessary.